Let's start by reflecting again on the power of Toyota as the reference model for lean. I've been thinking a lot about this question, and in several presentations I've made the point that actually the power of the reference model that Toyota gives us not only is that there is no excuse for anybody else not being able to do it. It's not something you can't do. Somebody's doing it. It's just we haven't figured out how to do it. That's one piece. The other piece is that Toyota's unique contribution, I think, was that it brought together the three powerful strands of improvement into a system that operationalized, that made these things operationable. And I think that's highly significant. Because Toyota is actually the reference model for all of these three strands: the quality strand, the end-to-end process thinking strand, and the learning by doing strand. But it's actually deeper than that. The more you think about it, the more I think about the management questions that we've been wrestling with for the last couple of days, the more I think of the quality movement. We've been distracted, I think, by the manifestations of the quality movement in the Six Sigma movement, in its focus on training experts in the tools for analyzing variance, which I think is extraordinarily important, no doubt about it. But that particular model of transferring the knowledge, which was very successful, of course, was one of hiring experts to do it for us. But I don't think that was actually the true significance of the quality movement, the contribution the quality movement made. And I'm also not thinking of the EFQM business model and the Baldrige Prize and all of that strand of the quality movement. I think if you think about all we've been talking about management, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a minute, the core real contribution that the quality movement brought with its focus on using a scientific approach to understanding organizational problems was the absolute core was this PDCA, or PDSA, or PDCR for reflect. I don't care which you use. But it's actually using the scientific approach to diagnosing and treating organizational issues. It's actually very profound. That's actually the true contribution and runs through everything Takashi talked about, everything Jim talked about, and I'm sure it'll be reflected in what John is going to talk about. So actually, we've heard about PDCA for years and found it hard as a standalone kind of concept. Yeah, we got the concept, we like the concept, but actually operationalizing it and turning it into the way we think and the way we behave, that was difficult. And Toyota managed to do that into every aspect of the way it thought about building its business system. That, I think, is the true significance of the quality movement in its manifestation in Toyota's business system. The end-to-end, as I said several times during this conference, the end-to-end perspective, I think, is extraordinarily important and quite hard to do. And we are naturally inclined to limit our analysis of the piece of the value stream we can see and control within our department, within our plant, within our hospital. And we can, I think, go beyond to think about synchronizing the support activities necessary to enable that value stream to flow. We can also now think about the management system that is necessary to support that. But it is increasingly important, I think, as we move our skills from analyzing value streams to analyzing interdependent value systems. A design system, a production system, a support system, a care system. And I think, again, the whole systems thinking movement produced a lot of interesting insights and went off in one direction, which was the sort of simulation, modeling kind of world. And the other world kind of got lost in interesting intellectual concepts, but not operationalized. And I think, again, what Toyota's example tells us is this is how we can actually operationalize and work with systems thinking. And the third lesson, which is actually even more profound. If we are going to run an interdependent value stream or value system in which we are going to remove all of the buffers and we are going to link steps together, not only do they have to be performed right first time on time, but we cannot do that without engaging those people who actually perform those steps. So that means for the learning stream, there's a deeper significance than simply the learning by doing insights that we and Toyota got from the TWI program, which really was a remarkable piece, or a more remarkable step forward in terms of learning by doing. But the true significance is more than that. It's because it reverses the separation in the traditional Sloan management system, in most modern management systems, the separation of thinking and doing. This system can only work when we recombine thinking and doing. So everybody needs to learn not only to see, not only to act, but to work together for this system actually to work well. And that's actually quite a profound change, because that profoundly changes how we think about our transformation model. We're no longer, and we are slipping into the wrong kind of thinking when we think of relying on experts, creating even lean experts. We need lean experts, don't get me wrong. We need deep functional knowledge. But people operating, that we need to combine that with people in the process managing the activities day to day. They need to be engaged and given the same ability to think and do and combine thinking and doing together. So this is no longer just a separation of thinking and doing. Everybody is thinking and doing. That's, I think, the true significance of that, of the iteration or the metamorphosis, the evolution that Toyota made to that insight that they got from using the TWI program as the basis for their training methods. And then, as I've said several times in the conference, and Alan Mitchell's presentation brought home, I think, something we've been talking about for several years that is now actually happening, and the web is fundamentally changing everything. And I believe that you were all probably a bit unsettled by Alan's presentation. So you should have been. Because change of this nature is unsettling. It means we don't quite know where we're going to end up. Both as consumers, I can see an exciting prospect of managing my life better, and as providers, that will have to respond to that in a very different way. So I want to just talk about those 4 points. I want to use that as a structure for my reflections today over the thinking I've been doing, based upon the action research that I've been involved in over the years and involved in today. And you've had the taste of several of those strands of the opportunities to think and look at the world in a slightly different way. So, we start always with what is the work? What is the value-creating work? And that is the foundation of a lean system, is what is the value-creating work? What needs to be done to support that, and what management do we need to enable that to happen? We don't actually need a lot more than that from management. What we need is management to help facilitate the value creation process. So what is the work of management? What is the task of management? And we've been playing around with different ways of capturing this into a usable framework. And this is my iteration of my latest set of hypotheses as to what constitutes a useful framework for thinking about management. Thinking about how management can support the value creation process. First thing that management does, that the process itself can't do, is determine what's important for the organization. What's important for customers, what's important for the organization to survive, what's important for the engagement of employees in that value creation process. And that's all about how to focus on the vital few. And again, this is the problem solving, the PDCA, all comes from using the tools, the scientific tools of analyzing problems. The next step then is, having understood the vital few, how do we then deploy the right improvements to close the performance gaps that constitute the vital few that we want to close, that will make the biggest difference to the performance of the organization or the delivery of value to customers. So how do we learn to effectively deploy the right improvement projects, typically through the organization? And the flip side of that is, how do we then create the stability in those processes and create flow and synchronize the support activities? So how does management help to unblock the obstacles to flow and the externally driven amplification and noise and variance that people in the process themselves cannot see, cannot be responsible for, because they're coming from outside the system as they define it and see it? I think those are two halves of the same issue. And then the third is how to develop capabilities and how to develop future capabilities, both of managers and people managing the process, people running the process, basically to solve problems, to respond to the feedback coming from the process, to respond to it, to root cause problems, and to work together and collaborate. And I'll have a little bit more to say about that later. And then the fifth task, I think, increasingly important as the web changes everything, is how do we prepare to meet these future challenges? How do we really understand the implications, the opportunities, the new business models that are opening up when we think back from the customer? Now, this is 5. 5 is a very useful number. Remember, we set out in lean thinking to define the principles for organizing a process, a value stream, because 5 is about the maximum number of things we can remember altogether. Once the list gets longer, we can't quite remember all of them. So there's a purpose to this. But actually, underlying this, you could impose the quality end-to-end learning stream as well. The first one is essentially a manifestation of the quality of the Plan, Do, Check, Act. And that's the fundamental mental model behind that. The next two are obviously two sides of the process issue. The fourth one is obviously the learning one. And you could also take the other way of looking at this. The first one is about purpose, defining purpose. The second two and 3 are about defining the process to deliver that purpose. And 4 is about mobilizing the people, enabling the people to manage the process to deliver the purpose. So actually what we're looking at here, I'm increasingly convinced, we're looking at an archetype and a framework that is very useful for thinking about the work of management. So please take this as a set of hypotheses. They are entirely hypotheses based upon a lot of observation, a lot of reflection, a lot of discussion, but they are hypotheses, and please, as you use them, come back with amendments to them and changes to them, because this is a debate that we need to have for quite a period of time. But I am more confident that we are getting closer to be understanding and being able to describe in a useful fashion the archetype behind the management system necessary to support the creation of value. So let's just talk a little bit about those in terms of my reflections, again, about what the lean movement needs to do to be able to bring that about. So I'm talking about lean practice for leaders. What are elements, some of the elements that I think we need to be better at to be able to help managers do. First one is solving strategic problems by focusing on closing the vital few gaps, and doing that and understanding the power of doing that by focusing on quality, by doing things right, and focusing on time, on the key dimension, time, of system performance, as opposed to focusing on cost initially and then maybe quality and time. The real significance is actually understanding that if we focus on quality and time, if we get the process right, if we get the system to function, to flow, etc., that will deliver the results. And I actually don't agree that we don't focus on results, that we only focus on means and the results will happen. I think we have to focus on both. We have to drive this with a clear understanding of the results that we want to achieve, that we need to achieve, that we think are possible, but we need to recognize how those results can be achieved. And we can do an awful lot to illustrate that and to show that. And that's all about also problem solving at a strategic level, which we are less expert at. We're much easier about solving problems at an operational level. Second issue is, and I think this is important, I've played with this for a very long time, is seeing the organization as a value-creating system as opposed to, which is itself a combination of a series of value streams. A series of events, a series of flows, and a series of feedback loops. The great thing about a system is it tells you how it feels. It tells you how it's working. Often we don't respond and listen, but if we do, that is the signal to enable us to diagnose what is disturbing the system. We focus on the symptoms of the disturbance, which are often the waste, the most obvious symptoms. We need to dig down several layers below that to understand what those wastes are symptoms of. What are the underlying root causes by understanding the performance of the system as a whole. I'll speak a little bit more about that in a minute. The third one is one that John Darlington has been thinking about quite a while, and I've been thinking about it too in other contexts, is that it is rightly the process owner's responsibility to improve the process against a goal. It is actually not necessarily their responsibility to think about what they do to utilize the freed up resource to turn that into the currency of the organization, which is money. That is actually, I think, a senior management responsibility to understand how the physical process will free up time, will reduce cost, could increase sales, could save a shed load of cash, and could save unnecessary capital expenditure. It's senior management's job to turn the process improvements into money. We're not good at that in the lean movement because we think that's kind of obvious. And yet, if that doesn't happen, most of the costs are still there and you haven't made any difference to the organization. So that's a skill we need to get better at. And it's a skill that is needed at the top, not necessarily further down the organization. I've shown this slide before, and I could have shown a similar slide for the construction industry. I could have shown a similar slide for the grocery industry, because that's how I have to think. I have to think about the system, the major flows, the major wastes. And when you begin to do that, when you really begin to walk and to see, in this system you see the invisible weight at the end of the process is the significant disturbance of the system, significant weights in the system. And then you dig down and say, well, why does that happen? And you begin to see, well, actually, there isn't a plan. There's no visibility of when a patient's ready to leave. There's no agreement on that, no visibility of that. There's no actual plan for the care path and the care that patients need to receive. So how do you check plan versus actual? So and how do you synchronize, therefore, completely disconnected departments? This is a great example to see all of the aspects of that. And so actually it digs you down to the fundamental building blocks that we have to get right in order to create operational stability in order to address the systemic noise and variance in the system. If this was the grocery industry supply chain, then we'd be recognizing that the physical inventory throughout the process were caused by the way the information is managed, by delays, by forecasting way ahead, by passing information up the chain, by just-in-case orders, etc., etc. Classic Forrester effect. So unless we tackle the information flows, we're hardly going to have any impact on the performance of the system as a whole. So we've got to get used to actually thinking in systems. I kind of do this naturally, and that's how I think. I know that very many others doesn't come naturally, I've observed. We've got to learn how to do it better. So 3 more lean practices. Then the one we're familiar with, I think, of using catchball then to create a dialogue down the organization to turn the gaps into actions through only 3 levels. I think we learnt that from Takashi. We'll come back to that. Very, very important. That is, you can't catchball too far down or in too many levels, but you can get the alignment, and Peter Watkins showed an extraordinarily good example of that in the division that he's now going to head at GKN. The 5th practice, I think, is knowing how to tackle this issue of vertical and horizontal that Jim talked about, that we've learned essentially from John's observations on the role of the chief engineer at Toyota, which is, if we're going to focus on the organization, the value creation process, somebody has to be responsible, given the responsibility for it. What does that mean? It means giving project and value stream managers the responsibility to gain agreement on what needs to be, on the current situation, on the problem, define the problem, on gaining agreement to act, on gaining a dialogue about the necessary resources from the function holders to carry out the actions, and then to review progress, to respond to interruptions and deviations, and to deliver the results. And so we've been doing a lot of experimentation with this role of value stream manager and how the value stream manager relates to functional managers holding the authority of the resources. And very important to that is the context, which I'll come back to in a minute. And all of this finally make it possible for senior management to deselect their less important activities. This, in my view, in my experience, is the hardest thing to do, personally and organizationally. It is easier to launch 1,000 projects and hope some of them work than to focus on the vital few and say, all of those are great ideas, but this is the few we need to do. And yet, this is a huge distraction of management time and effort. So those are some of the lean practices I think we've got to get better at in helping top management learn to do. In doing that, I think we will have a very significant impact on the effectiveness of management. And this is the route to opening up the management time that Takashi was talking about from firefighting to improvement. Just think about it. If we are able to focus on the vital few and deselect the unnecessary activities, that frees up a tremendous amount of time and effort of expensive senior staff right there. As we manage our projects through a visual management environment with frequent stand-up project reviews, we've heard several of those, that not only keeps the projects on track, but it saves a tremendous amount in unnecessary meeting times. And I'm glad to hear Klaus and others get itchy feet being in a meeting that's longer than an hour. And the necessary question is, well, how could that be 3/4 of an hour? How could we make it even more visual so we spend less time reading words and more time understanding symbols, data, number, pictures, and so on? As we create stability and Gemba management by means go and take part, go and see the deviations, ask the questions and so on, that absolutely eliminates most of the firefighting and emails. That is tremendous relief. As we develop the capabilities of our staff, they are able to take a lot more initiative themselves in solving problems quickly and responding to interruptions and knowing what to do and so on. All of which frees up time for innovation. And I would say for designing lean solutions for the web era. That is the task right now. Now, you could say this is all standard work for managers. Yes, it is. But if you say standard work for managers, managers don't. They hear standard, they hear all the negative words, I think. This is standard work for managers. But this is the consequences and the why, which I think are a better selling point. So I think exercises with senior management to improve effectiveness would yield orders of magnitude bigger gains than moments saved in the value creation process itself. Very significant. And the other consequence of the practices and the improved effectiveness are also a set of leadership behaviors, and I've stolen all of these from John. We have learned a tremendous amount from John's observations, his reflections on his experience at Toyota, and he's going to talk more about them. In isolation, they're kind of mind-blowing. Manage as if you have no power. Follow me, go see, ask why. Ask questions, don't tell people the answers. In isolation, those are kind of a bit mind-boggling. Great, but I don't know, I could do that. In context, they begin to make sense. And those behaviors can be encouraged, absolutely can be made visible, and we can become conscious of them, but actually they emerge out of the practice. Let's go down one level to value stream practice, a practice at the value stream level. Here it's about, yes, building the management system, which we've talked about. It's about conducting whole value stream analysis. It's about, and when I say whole value stream analysis, I mean the primary flow, the value creation process itself, the key support activities, value streams that enable that to flow, like IT. Absolutely. It's an enabling value stream. And in healthcare, absolutely, critically important, the synchronization of those support activities against a plan. Once we have a plan that can reveal the demand and attack time, then we can synchronize the support activities. But equally important is the cadence and the structure of review and direction and project management. So then creating the hub to manage operations and to manage projects, and interestingly they come together. How management can support the value stream leader in this new role, which is kind of an uncomfortable role initially, but actually with the right support and the right context, I think really becomes possible. And then establishing the fundamental operations management and synchronizing of the support activities. So I think we are well down the path to knowing quite a lot of this. And I like Takashi's slide of the 3 levels. I think we should keep that in our head, because essentially that's the way of linking the top and the bottom. The process speaks. If the process can speak in an intelligible way, in the right way, in a controlled way, in a way that is timely, Takashi says escalate 2 decision-ready issues per management cycle upwards. I think that's a very good rule of thumb. That makes it manageable, that you will get the right issues resolved quickly and responding to the feedback from the process, and then you will get the right decisions in response to that coming down again. So I think that's a very important part of the image to have. And I'm not going to talk about the Oobeya. I think this is a fundamental step forward, and people have been playing with this for a while, but actually we're now beginning to see the power of this. And when I'm looking at the Oobeya, I'm struck by the similarities between the PDCA, the manifestation of PDCA in projects, in managing projects, which is where this really came from, and managing production. What is common about it is that we have the classic PDCA cycle, and that we are managing it through the planned versus actual process. We're breaking the project down into small increments of time, reviewed frequently, looking at planned versus actual. We're doing exactly the same in the production environment. So I think if I was designing at a Oobeya room, I'd have one side, I'd have all the value streams and how well they were progressing today. On the other side, I'd have all the projects. So it's actually as simple as that. Now, the second thing that I was really struck by, and have been struck by watching people working in such a context, is it changes behaviors. Just like the practices at the top change behaviors, I think this is the fundamental, this context for the value stream management role and the value stream team activity actually changes behavior. And this is my default hypothesis from sitting in Takashi's workshop in June. What I call emergent behaviors. You don't a second time go into one of those meetings unprepared, not having gathered the facts and talked to the people whose perspectives are relevant to the issue you're describing. Going into one of those meetings not having the facts to make a decision wastes everybody's time, and you don't do that twice. So go and get the facts, go and talk to the people involved, fundamental. Be able to summarize key points quickly, no more PowerPoint. I've seen the classic consultant-driven 90-point PowerPoint, cannot challenge, fantastically complicated, it's all show. The bad news was on slide 34. And you missed it. So no PowerPoint, this is the Brashi. This is actually basically the ability to summarize the key points and the facts very quickly, to point to the vital few things that we need to know to make this decision. The third thing is then you are debating the facts on the wall. And you're committing to actions based upon that discussion. And you learn very quickly not to commit to an action that you don't think you can actually do. So they're making vague promises, we'll do that by 2 weeks' time, but with no intention of doing it. That doesn't last very long in this environment. And that is the prevailing way in which meetings are conducted in healthcare. Lots of talk, not really anticipating doing any action. I'm being unfair, but actually it's very true. Surfacing conflicting objectives if the facts show, and we agree they show, that I should take this action that has a benefit over here, but is actually going to make my scores worse, then we need to talk about it. And we need to resolve it there and then before we agree to the actions. You don't, as I said before, you don't forget to act, because your action on the wall is a promise to your colleagues. It's very powerful. It really changes behavior. And the deviations from the plan, Takashi's red-green, are evident, and that's what you talk about. So it's exception management, having decided the plan, reviewing it going forward. And then prepare issues for escalation. That's a joint process, again, in a standard way that makes those issues clear, and the choice is clear and the facts clear for passing up for resolution upstairs. So I think this, and finally, very, very important, maybe in case you missed it, turning this visual environment into a learning exercise. Just as the A3 is a personal dialogue with a sensei or with your boss as a learning exercise, this too is a learning environment. It's a fantastic learning environment. But we lose all the learning if we don't actually capture the learning and capture what Takashi calls the aha moments. If we actually complete the cycle, the reflect cycle, then we see the learning taking place and we see what we've learned as a group and as individuals. So this is extraordinary, the power of visually managing together. It's the context that enables collaborative work to take place, in my view. Okay, a couple of comments before we close. On lean learning. Training within industry, extraordinarily powerful. I mean, just an enormous step forward. Taught us about learning by doing. Mike Rother's Toyota Kata, I think, is a great contribution as well. Taught us about learning by practice. The importance of practice, and it is so true. And I think John Shook's Managing to Learn taught us about the learning through dialogue power of using the A3 as he described it. Extraordinarily powerful building blocks on our understanding of learning. Now, I'm no expert on learning. I'm reading a ton of books because I'm looking for theoretical understandings and evidence from the neuroscience and psychology on our learning processes and our problem-solving processes. And one of the issues I keep coming across in that reading is, what does it actually take to take a learning, an experience that we have, and take that from our short-term memory into our long-term memory? And by that I mean, how do we go through the process, and it's partly a physical redesign process, of the fundamental constructs and frameworks and mental models that live in our long-term memory that allow us to make sense of the world? So what is it? How can we facilitate our short-term experiences so that they are more readily transferable and usable in reconfiguring our long-term memory? I came across a quote in a book about learning and how the web is changing our learning, where a psychologist was saying, and I take this as a hypothesis, he was saying we cannot transfer learning from our short-term to long-term memory until we've defined the problem that we're thinking about. So defining the problem, which is the start of the PDCA process, is actually fundamentally important also in the learning process. If we do that well, then not only will we have a good chance of solving the problem, but we have a good chance of reflecting and learning from the problem. So I think there is a great deal to be learned from neuroscience, and there's a lot of interesting stuff that will take us a lot further on the learning journey. And there's a further problem. I often observe that we look at facts, we look at evidence, and yet we keep doing the old things. Despite the evidence, we know this doesn't work, but we keep doing it. And I think this is a problem of how do we learn how to act. It's not just how do we learn how to think differently, this is how do we learn how to act. Faced with the evidence, how do we act? Now, again, I think there are interesting lessons to be learned from behavioral economics, from evolutionary biology, from several other disciplines about how do we actually learn how to act. My hunch is, just hypotheses, is that the PDCA process itself helps us to learn into the long-term memory. The visual context for working together and the dialogue and the working together actually provides a much more productive environment in which we can learn to act. Because we are externalizing the action, it's not just internal. All of the behavioral characteristics that I talked about from the Oobeya situation play in there. So those are hypotheses. I'd love you to read a lot more and send me any good references that you come across. But I think we are on a journey here of learning about learning. Now, that also, the fundamental reversal of the separation of thinking and doing, which I think is profound, that also made me reflect on the role of the sensei versus the traditional consultant. And I see so much of what consultants do in a traditional model of the expert, teaching a bit of their knowledge. doing for you, not working. And sometimes we fall into that trap in the lean movement. And what I observed works better is my hunch is, this is more true to the real role of the sensei, is that the sensei's job is to actually advise senior management what is possible by going and taking a look and diagnosing the situation. And helps management then to relate that to solving what they need to do to take those gains, to close the gap and solve their business problems. And that having closed that loop, then management can sign up to achieving these results. And understanding what is going to happen, what is necessary to do so from the sensei. And then comes the tough part of mentoring, of doing the right things, of helping people to do the right things and learn through doing the right things, that builds the line management capabilities to sustain it. So I think we need, and again this is a hypothesis, and we need more reflection on how we really effectively help people not just learn but act in a different way. So again, think about this, let me know your thoughts. Finally, the web era. I mean, Alan summarized it better than I can, but I can only think about this through concrete examples. Let me just very quickly. I think the web is shifting power to consumers. Just as in the retail industry, very clear, power has shifted from the manufacturers to the retailers, it's now shifting to consumers. No question. In every industry, consumers are now informed, empowered, and impatient, and increasingly empowered and increasingly informed as the things Alan talks about manifests itself in the next couple of years. So I think we need to think of consumers as an integral part of the supply chain, not outside the supply chain. And we need to think of households or individuals as mini businesses, full of complex processes that need to be managed. And what we do as providers is help consumers to create value in their lives and to manage their consumption processes. That's actually what we're doing. Not selling them a product, they're using the product to create value in their lives, and we need to help them do that effectively. Because I think Alan is completely right, consumers in future will manage their own data and share it with chosen providers, which fundamentally changes the relationship with customers. And exactly the same is happening in terms of products that have intelligent feedback in them. In the aircraft industry, power by the hour, aero engines are now full of sensors that can tell Rolls-Royce that an engine halfway to Singapore is malfunctioning, and they know faster than the airline do, and so they'll be prepared when the plane reaches Singapore to do whatever's necessary. So we're getting feedback from use now as providers, as well as conscious feedback in a sense from customers. Several years ago, we began thinking about this as Tesco was beginning to think about the convenience revolution. Small pack size, frequent rapid replenishment supply chains meant we could create convenience stores at almost no additional cost to replenishment big stores. And at the time, John was working in Starbucks, I was working with Tesco, and John we were connected with Amazon. And we had a dream of bringing them together, because our vision of the convenience store of the future was a combination of all three. Of access to the complete web offer of products in a convenience store that was also a meeting point and a dialogue point. Well, actually what's happened is the convenience stores have become mini supermarkets and not much more. Until recently. Because now we're not seeing them as meeting points really yet. We're seeing them possibly as ordering points. We're beginning to see them as pickup points. Amazon is now experimenting with pickup points. In urban areas in particular, they're looking at automated pickup points that you can order a product, it can be in the pickup point ready for you to pick it up within hours rather than over the next day with an expensive distribution system to your home. Likewise, Tesco is rolling out pickup points, 500 pickup points across the country now, at its convenience stores, so you can order stuff online, and instead of it being delivered to you when you're at home, which you're often not, you can choose to pick it up at a pickup point in a convenience store. So we're beginning to see this model play out. Our dream we didn't ever get all of these three characters together. But what's still missing is the opportunity to create a dialogue with the most frequent customers, different clusters of customers, and to build on the relationship and the knowledge of those customers that they might share with us to plan ahead, and together to reduce the cost of the last mile while maximizing convenience. So we really can have access to the 100,000 or 150,000 products in the catalogue without having to store them close to customers and having them available and pick upable and so on at a convenient location. In fact, in my village, the only place that's open most of the day is the pub. This would be a great place to go and get a coffee or maybe a beer later on and pick up your groceries or pick up your book from Amazon. Rather than having, as happens at the moment, every delivery driver to our village has to go to the post office to ask, where is this house? Because I live in a dispersed rural area. So there are going to be lots and lots of opportunities for reconfiguring the connection with customers. And 10 years ago, I wrote a paper for Tesco illustrating this and suggesting that they need to put more skilled people at the customer interface rather than less. So we'll see. But on the supply side, as we are beginning to see a reversal of the trend from big central complex plants serving a whole region to exploring distributed production close to consolidation centres, to developing small local suppliers, which Tesco's been doing, feeding into those consolidation centres, into the network, cross-docking through other DCs to local picking centres and stores, possibly using shared production facilities and logistics. And that's being discussed big time in the grocery industry at the moment for environmental reasons. Very good, very, very good. So these trends are beginning to happen. But actually, it all starts here. It's my final slide. With the 6 basic fundamental needs of every human being. The base of Maslow's pyramid, if you like. And we wrote about this in Lean Solutions. Communication, mobility, personal mobility, logistics, getting the stuff, health, finance, and shelter, the fundamental needs. And all of those needs are met. We manage that by combining products, services, and knowledge. Increasingly, we do the combining from a growing potential supply base. So we do more of the managing. In the book, we described a method for understanding the process, the consumption process for combining those different things and solving a problem. But I think over the next few years, we need to take this lean innovation opportunity really seriously. And I think there are 3 things that we need to think about if we're going to create a framework for thinking how lean can contribute to speeding up the innovation process to meet this rapidly changing world. And there are 3 things. The first is thinking back from the customer. Now, what does that mean? That means thinking with your knowledge of what's possible from the customer's perspective, despite your assets. There are 3 people who I've seen do that systematically, quite outstanding individuals. And the first is Terry Leahy at Tesco, who was determined that as we showed it was possible to build a rapid replenishment supply chain, said, well, we're going to use that for home shopping and for convenience stores. Guess the reaction of his store managers? They were furious. They said, this will take away traffic from our stores. It'll be a disaster. Terry said, this is what our customers are going to want. We can either spend ages and lots of money persuading them to come to our existing stores, or we can reconfigure our assets in order to serve the same customers in multiple different ways. Reversing the logic, not defending our assets. Jeff Bezos started opening the website to other resellers. Do you think the reaction in Amazon was very favorable to that? No, they were furious. They said, you will cannibalize our sales. Did exactly the opposite. Actually created a much more attractive platform and created another revenue stream, ultimately. And he did that against the perception of what was good for his assets. And I think Steve Jobs, the significant thing about Steve Jobs is that he designed this wonderful technology of the iPhone, the iPad, giving us power, almost greater power sometimes, computing power than our providers, by thinking back from the customer. And I sensed that when I looked at the initial reviews from the techies when the iPad came out. And they were very sneering. It's nothing new, it's not very interesting. I thought, he's got it right. He's thinking back from the customer, not thinking forward from the techies. So that's what I mean by thinking back from the customer. We have to step outside our comfort zone and think back from the customer. And true leaders do that. Second thing is we have to think about whole systems. What is then the system, a reconfigured system with a business model that could meet those needs in a different way? And the third and final one, I think, is the lesson, very important lesson we can learn from the software industry, which is we've been talking about managing projects through breaking the work into short cycles, review cycles. We're talking about managing production by frequently reviewing plan versus actual. In the innovation world, it's about a standardized rapid learning cycle. I listened to a presentation just the other week from Google where they have standardized what was the bottleneck in the software development cycle, which was the testing process. They standardized the testing process now, so instead of 6 months releases, 3 months releases, they can talk about twice weekly, even daily releases of software. That they can test on paired sites, one with, one without, immediately and get customer feedback. They can get feedback on sign-ups, activity, and advertising revenue within hours. We learned when we did the early work at Tesco on promotions, you could get 95% feedback on the uptake of a promotion within 24 hours. That's exactly what Google's finding. So the people who are going to win are not the big blockbuster, but the people who have the rapid learning cycle and provide a creative environment of ideas to try out in that rapid learning cycle. So I think we've got a task ahead to create a framework now. Now we've understood the framework for understanding processes. We've understood the framework for understanding the management of those processes. Now we have the framework for directing our lean innovation efforts. So that, to me, is the exciting prospect ahead for the lean movement.